Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamie Still, and I'm the head of the Associate Members and Events Committee for the DSCA. And I want to welcome everybody to our webinar entitled Special Emergency Powers for Board Members, the latest legislative update. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Derrick Maginness, who's an association attorney for Norton, Hammersley, Lopez, and Skokos. So Derrick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. So welcome, everybody. My name is Derrick Maginness. I'm a partner at Norton Hammersley. Thank you to the DSCA board for hosting this presentation and allowing us to present this information to you guys today. Hopefully you'll find it informational and helpful. I think Kristen has a copy of these slides if anybody needs it. So just reach out to her and let us know. When we're going through this, I'll be moderating the discussion, but if anybody has something to add, please feel free to speak up. We're going to touch today on the special emergency powers for board members. We'll be covering the appropriate measures boards can take when a state of emergency has been declared. There's been some changes to the law that are going into effect regarding, COVID-19 and things like that. I find it interesting because I like the word contagion. It just reminds me of all those crazy movies that came out when people were getting infected and Dustin Hoffman and all that good stuff. So hopefully the changes will make it easier for you guys to deal with things and protect you guys moving forward. Before we get started, I'd like for our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. I'll start with Jake. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Jake Howse with FirstService Residential. We manage high-rise condos and master plan communities throughout North America and have a nice presence in downtown Sarasota. Glad to be here and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks, Derrick.
Thank you. Alex?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Turner. I'm with Associa Gulf Coast Management, and we manage properties all over the United States, but specifically here we do from Pasco County down to Marco Island. Also very interested in the downtown Sarasota area. Please feel free to give me a call if you have any questions. We're also big on board member education, so happy to help out your board in that aspect as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alex. Jeff McDuffie?
Mute. Hey, Jeff, you're on mute.
Yeah, my first Zoom meeting.
I read your lips. It was brilliant.
Just kidding. Yeah, so I'm Jeff McDuffie, president of Lighthouse Property Management. We are in our 31st year of community association management here in Sarasota and Manatee counties.
Thank you, Jeff. And Fiona?
Thanks, Derrick. Good afternoon, everybody. Fiona DiDomenico here with Castle Group. Thanks so much for having us today. For those of you that don't know, Castle is a local company here. We have an office in Sarasota, also in Tampa, and I work out of both of those offices. And we specialize in communities where we can put a team on site. So whether that's a condo or an HOA, a lot of our associations are highly amenitized and would love to help you out. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to give me a shout. Again, Fiona with Castle Group.
Great, thanks, Fiona. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the Zoom protocols. Chris, if you see me looking to my right with disbelief, it's because Kristen is texting me how bad I'm messing up, but no worries. So we're gonna, unless you're called upon to speak, try to mute your audio so that you're not, stepping over somebody else. If you're joining in, please, use the chat room function at the bottom of your Zoom, and during the program to pose your questions. If you could keep the questions general, that would be very helpful. If there's time at the end of the program, we'll take additional questions, and we'll do our best to see what we can answer throughout. And at the end, if you could stay on through the extent of the program, you can learn about our Platinum Associate Members prize giveaways. And then, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and just bear with me for a second so I get it all set up correctly. Host disable participant screen sharing. So I think, Jamie, you have to allow me to share the screen, I believe.
I think that's Patrick that should be out because I think he's controlling it.
Okay. Let's see here. There we go. Let's see. Display settings. Okay, so can everybody see the screen? Everybody's good? Okay. Let's see. Slide 3. So we all remember back on March 9th, 2020, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis declared a state of emergency in Florida due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Since that time, community association board members and managers have had many questions on what precautionary measures community associations should take. This was a rough time, and it was new to everybody. Usually we're dealing with hurricanes and things like that, and you've done it over and over, and you know how to react. You know what the emergency powers are. You know what's there. This was a little bit different because you're not coming in and cleaning up damage. You're actually dealing with it in real time, and it's changing on a daily basis. Things that were coming out of the CDC, shut this down, open this up, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Nobody really knew what to do. So what the legislature has done is they went ahead and they addressed that this year, and they've gone ahead and updated the special emergency powers. Now they're going to go in effect when something like COVID-19 comes into play, and it's going to give you the opportunity to utilize these emergency powers before, during, and after the emergency is declared, rather than usually it comes in after. Like when a hurricane hits, they look at every area and say, okay, Miami's a declaration, Sarasota's a declaration of emergency, and you have to wait for it to come into play unless you have some sort of emergency powers in your declaration. This takes away from that and allows you to, when the governor, he put it out there for the entire state and said everybody can go ahead and start using these emergency powers. So this makes it easier for the associations to react. And regardless of the situation, a pandemic, gas shortage, or a hurricane, when the governor declares a state of emergency, certain powers go into effect accordingly. We're going to discuss all this stuff today. Some of it is new, so hopefully we'll give you some good information and you guys will be able to know how to react going forward. My best advice is to just look at what the local health experts are doing, look at what the CDC is doing, and react accordingly. You can use these powers to do that, okay? Listed on this slide is the statute that regulates Florida condominiums in regards to emergency powers, 718-1265. And basically this gives you a list of the powers that come into play when a declaration of emergency has been out there. Basically, to the extent allowed by law and unless specifically prohibited by your declaration. So, everybody loves that depends talk. Can I use these powers? If it tells you in your declaration that you're not supposed to use them, you got to look at that stuff to know what you can and can't do. You want to make sure that you have the ability to utilize these and then familiarize yourself with them. I don't know of any associations that I deal with that aren't familiar with these emergency powers and know how to use them. So now that it's updated, you guys can kind of go ahead and use these to apply to how you're dealing with these situations. So if I could ask the panelists, if you can illustrate how some of these regulations helped associations during and after the pandemic.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think probably the easiest example, Derrick, is, especially when COVID first hit. I mean, we were having scenarios where, phones were ringing off the hook with associations with COVID spreading like wildfire, and the boards had to, have meetings, sometimes more than one board meeting in the same day, right? So for them to be able to, as practical, announce a meeting quickly, cancel a meeting. We had scenarios where annual meetings had to be canceled, with very little notice because COVID was whipping through a community. So I think that's one of the quickest examples that comes to my mind.
Yeah, meetings were tough. I had a lot of people wanting to do Zoom meetings, but they were prohibited, and we had to figure out a way to, amend things and get that going. So that was really tough. I agree with that. Jake, is there anything you can add to that?
Yeah, so specifically, there's a section in the emergency powers that talks about naming assistant officers who are not necessarily elected directors to be assistants. So typically you have a 5-member board. This is talking about appointing assistant treasurers, assistant presidents to help in the midst of a state of emergency. So practical application here is, like Fiona was saying, there was so much coming at boards of directors when COVID hit. This might be something that you can think of going forward, where, like that case when you were hit with something like COVID, where there was so much coming at board members, you can go ahead and appoint assistant officers for each position that will come into effect if there is a state of emergency. And God forbid a catastrophic hurricane, because we are in hurricane season, hits, you got to think about what would happen in that case, and you're going to need more board members to make decisions quicker, right? And you're going to need some help. It also talks about relocating the association's principal office. So again, imagine downtown storm surge, the community has an office on site, it gets wiped out. Where's the office going to be? How are you going to conduct business if that happens? So these are some things that you can think about and put into your emergency plan. And the last point I'll make is when Hurricane Irma hit, everyone left Miami through Sarasota all the way up to Tampa, and they went, a lot of people went to Atlanta. So you got to be thinking about, in those cases when you have to evacuate, how are you going to conduct business? How are you going to send out mass communication? Because really you should be able to relocate your office and continue to do business. So those are my key takeaways from this portion, Derrick.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, there was so much going on with this, and so much information, the emergency officials and things like that. Alex, what was your experience with all that?
Yeah, thanks, Derrick. So great points by Fiona and Jake. And I just want to mention, I've been in this industry for 25 years, and I would say 2020, I have never felt so bad for volunteer board members. So we're looking at unprecedented times in the pandemic and the beginning and the height, where the boards were given the task of deciding on whether to close or restrict access to the amenities and common areas. And you can imagine, they're taking on this burden of slowing the spread and mitigating the health and safety risk of their residents, which is a huge, that's a lot of pressure for board members. And I know boards receive both praise and criticism for how they handled this. With Associa, I can tell you we received several threats and complaints of suing boards because they closed down the amenities and took the jazzercise out of the pool or whatever happened. So I think boards really had to rely on the emergency powers, the CDC guidelines, what CAI was saying, their legal counsel, in order to proceed forward, feeling confident that they could make those decisions for their membership. And board members are well within their rights to make these decisions. So I think, following those emergency orders, following what's going on, what the county and city are doing is really important. And while we certainly want to rely on the emergency powers, it's important that we're also keeping abreast of any county, city, CDC, state guidelines that are also running concurrently with that. For instance, I'll use the pools, for example. A couple of the different health departments in different areas that I manage added additional cleaning requirements to the pool and pool area. So the boards have to keep up with that. So just please use your resources, board members. Don't shoulder this all yourself. Use your management company, your legal team. Count on your CAI. I have to say CAI was really great during the pandemic about getting out great information. So yeah, I think that's I think the amenity closings was a big deal, and that was something that I think the emergency powers was able to guide us through.
Great, thanks. Yeah, the pools were the biggest issue, I think. Yep. And everybody's so upset because, oh, I'm paying for that. I'm paying. You're actually paying for the maintenance, not really the use. So, but I always found that interesting. And, people would get upset if you took the chairs, if you moved the chairs 6 feet apart, they would move them back together. And, it was kind of funny. I know my HOA, they just took them and put them in storage. So nobody could even go there. And I think they actually, I want to say they put police tape up at one point.
That's aggressive.
Which in my association doesn't really matter because everybody's got a pool anyway and hardly anybody uses a community pool. So contracting, I think, is an important issue too. Jeff, did you have anything that you dealt with that was important?
I do, and just to piggyback on what you and Alex just said, I mean, you think about the timing of when COVID-19 became a thing here in this country and in this area. It couldn't have been a worse time, right? Second week of March, peak of our season here, kind of reminiscent of the Jaws movie where the shark attacked at the height of summer season, and couldn't have been a worse time. Same concept with COVID-19 and the decisions the boards were having to make with respect to closing pools and fitness centers, and for the beachfront properties, beaches. I mean, you think about people who have saved up for their, for the entire year, they're going to be down here for 1 month, the month of March, and you just closed all the amenities on them. And we've retained some of the threatening letters and threatening emails. We had one letter that was pinned to a pool that we closed down, threatening our manager physically for closing down. How dare you close down the pool when we're down here for 2 weeks out of the year, and how could you do that? So I agree with what's been said. It's a really difficult time for volunteer board members to be pressed into making these types of decisions. As far as the contracts are concerned, this slide that's up here now, this section of the statute, it's kind of funny because so much of the statute clearly is written envisioning that scenario where you have the catastrophic hurricane hit, right? That's the typical event that you think about in the state of Florida. And so this really deals with a situation where there's been property damage as a result of the event, property damage that extends into area that would typically be the responsibility of the unit owner or a group of unit owners, as opposed to the association as a whole. And this is just saying that, look, in an emergency situation, in a catastrophic situation, you as a board have not only the right, but the responsibility to contract with service providers to ensure the safety of the condominium as a whole, even if that means going in and doing work that would normally be under the purview of the unit owner. And kind of the theory here is, don't worry about who's responsible for the cost in the moment of the damage, of the catastrophe. Just fix the problem and focus on the immediate solution, and worry about the payment side of it at a later time. So this particular section really, it's not directly applicable to COVID-19 since viruses thankfully don't cause property damage. But it does kind of indirectly touch on the fact that in most situations when emergency powers are enacted, there's probably going to be unanticipated and unbudgeted costs that the association is going to incur. Again, think back to those early days of COVID before we kind of knew how it was transmitted and that sort of thing. I mean, think about the scramble that was going on for PPE, for masks, for gloves, for cleaning supplies, for hand sanitizer. I can remember for weeks, our HR department was consumed spending every day online trying to find hand sanitizer for clients, and getting it from wherever they could and distributing it out to our clients. And all of those things have a cost associated with it. There's costs associated with the additional staffing expenses or the increased custodial services that you're getting to wipe down all the surfaces, and God forbid when there were outbreaks within the building or a person got it, you're fogging your common areas. There's costs associated with that. And I have yet to see a budget in my years of doing this that has a global pandemic expense line item in it, right? That is not something that we envision. So I think the whole COVID experience has kind of served as yet another reminder of the importance of maintaining a healthy fund balance, your accumulation of budget surpluses over the years, importance of having a contingency line item to address these unexpected expenses, and maybe even the need for securing an emergency line of credit for the association to draw on in the event of a catastrophic event. But Yeah, COVID taught us a lot of things on catastrophe management.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I was walking my dog yesterday, and my wife, somebody was leaving one of our neighbors' houses, and she looked into their garage, and he had a whole wall of toilet paper. And I remember the toilet paper. We were in the Florida Keys when all this went down, and the things that the grocery stores were empty. Everything was empty. You're talking about the hand sanitizer. My sister-in-law was making hand sanitizer at her house. I think the hard part is these powers are limited to the reasonable necessary time to protect everybody. But this was such an expanded period of time, and everything just kept changing that just made it more and more difficult. Every municipality has something different. The differences between Sarasota and Manatee County were huge. Tampa, I remember Sarasota was a lot more open. Meanwhile, you could go up to Ybor and you couldn't really do anything. So it's not that far apart. My wife's cousins came down from Michigan. They thought it was just going to be the Wild West when they got down here because they were just locked in their houses. This was 2 months ago, and they were so happy to be here in Florida. And then when they got here, they were like, well, it seems kind of normal. Everybody's just doing their regular thing. They thought everybody's just partying, like the way the news was portraying it. But I think, I think we were fortunate to have a governor that was implementing this stuff in a reasonable manner personally. The way he addressed it on May 3rd, when he started rolling everything back, he entered an executive order basically saying, hey, look, I'm going to go ahead and revoke any and all of the local executive orders that are putting these restrictions on if they're not narrowly tailored to protect the health, safety, and welfare. I think he also went to such an extent that he was helping reduce or give diminished fines for people. So this really opened things back up, and it basically told the local governments that their restrictions and mandates were suspended. To an extent, I think that they still have the ability to, as long as it's very narrowly tailored, they can still implement things, but it is very hard to get around this order. The one thing the order does not address, though, is private rules enacted by Florida's community associations. And some associations are more stringent than others. We had that case down in Miami where the association, which is still ongoing, where that association is being sued for millions and millions of dollars because they tried to basically put a couple under house arrest because they thought they had COVID. It's common sense at some point has to come in and prevail. So panelists, what are some key takeaways that you can share in regards to the recent update where they lifted these restrictions and things like that?
Yeah, Derrick, I'll start this one off. So my first takeaway is this: everybody's in a different place. So don't feel pressured as a board or association to make any sweeping changes. You'll get there in time, whatever's best for your association. I think as we're walking around town nowadays, it almost seems like things have returned to a very or new normal, I'll call it, but associations need to do things in their own time. So I would say, firstly, just remember that the associations still have emergency powers that they can rely on, and I'm going to say reasonable rights. You're probably at this point down the road are not going to be able to restrict as much as you could in the beginning. But also start that plan, boards, on returning to normal operations. So what does that look like for your association? Maybe that still means we're going to maintain, sanitizer stations or whatever that entails for your association you're comfortable with. We're also coming into budget season. So are those items going to become part of your future budget? So make sure you're looking into that. And then again, just keeping up, this is kind of what I was talking about before, keeping up on the governor's orders. This is gonna, the newest, or excuse me, the latest one's gonna expire on June 26th. Interesting to see if it will be renewed in any way. And then you'll be looking for any kind of hurricane orders as well. So just make sure that you're following up with those guidelines. I know everybody part of this DSCA, these platinum sponsors are constantly updating you guys on that, those legal, where we stand on those. But so again, just take things in time for that's comfortable with your association, make a plan for your new normal, put those things in your budget, those cost items in your budget, and just keep up again with what's going on with the law and the governor's orders. Thanks, Derrick.
Thanks, Alex.
Just a really brief piece here that there has to be a connection between the power being utilized and the actual conditions taking place. So the example here is that, God forbid we have COVID-20 or COVID-21, you can't, if there's a state of emergency because of a pandemic, you, as a board, you can't mandate that everyone put up hurricane shutters. So there just has to be a connection there and something to be, to be aware of, so.
Yeah, and I think I'd add, that's a great point, Jake. I think I'd add too, remember back in March, Senate Bill 72, which gave us some protection, thank goodness, right? For homeowners associations, community associations from potential lawsuits related to COVID, which was nice to see. However, there's a big if, right? That was, there's liability protection there, but if you made a good faith effort, right, to make the community secure. And by that, I mean, if you said, well, I don't believe in this or I don't believe in that, so I'm not going to sanitize the elevators, or we're not going to, follow the local, guidelines regarding masks, things like that. So I think Alex mentioned it as well. You've got to pay attention to what the experts are saying. You don't necessarily have to agree with them personally, but you have to use, you're running a business. The association is a business. You got to use good business judgment, and you have to make those good faith efforts. And in the case of COVID, we all sort of look to what is the CDC saying. And then as things were changing locally, I traveled the state of Florida, and Derrick made a great point. It's what's happening in one county is completely different than what's happening in the other county. So we were, guiding our clients to look at what is CDC saying, and then what is your local agencies saying. And then of course, right, talk to your management company and make sure your attorney is in on those discussions when you're making and changing those rules.
Yeah, just to consistent with what Fiona just said, continue to follow the CDC guidelines for community associations. And I think you hit on a good point, Fiona, that we may not always agree on all of the recommendations that come, or the guidelines in this case, that come from CDC. But in your role as a board member, just like on the financial side, you have a fiduciary obligation to your association as a board member. You have an obligation to your association to, as best as possible, to follow the advice that is coming from professionals. It really is kind of analogous to the whole accounting area. You got the Financial Accounting Standards Board that comes up with the generally accepted accounting principles, and even if you don't agree with them all, you're still required to follow them in producing your financial statements. Well, same thing on this. You got to follow the advice of the experts. Err on the side of caution, even when you don't agree 100% with the recommendations of the experts.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. So we have one question, and it's from Alan Friedman, and I'm just going to read it. And if anybody wants to answer it, they can just chime in. And he says, I'm not clear if these things
that I just want to do it. I want to be on board.
I'm not clear if these things condo boards can do under 718-1265 apply to an emergency declared by the governor, e.g. hurricanes, disease. They do. If the governor declares an emergency, that's the whole point. That's when they come into effect. if there's not an emergency order in effect, then they're not applicable. And also, are these abilities optional? And if a board chooses not to do something, for instance, contract for something on behalf of the owners, is there any liability? Does anybody want to take that? I'm happy to, but if you guys want to,
I mean, the only thing I would say on that, Derrick, because it's really kind of a legal question when they start asking about liability, but I would say that with respect to all of this, the attorneys are perfect for giving you guidelines on what's acceptable within the law, right? What are you permitted to do or not permitted to do? But then there's the whole question of what are best practices within the context, within the parameters established by the law. What are your best practices? So, going back to the examples earlier about closing amenities, the board had the right under the emergency powers to close whatever amenities they deem necessary to close for the health and safety of the residents. So what are best practices though? And those best practices may vary depending on, at least today, may vary depending on the level of community spread there is. Is it a prominent issue in the community currently? Has it subsided so you can open your amenities? And I think that's where you can look to your management company to offer up insight on, okay, what are best practices given the conditions that we're operating under today? What are best practices?
Yeah, and I just add, Jeff, I think that's an excellent point, because I literally had that happen where I'd had a community say to me, well, Fiona, the community down the street is doing X, Y, and Z. And I happen to know, because we manage the community down the street as well, what was going on in that particular community. And it wasn't the same circumstance. So you do have to be careful about sort of broad brush when it comes to these types of things.
Yeah, those are good points. So, Mr. Freeman, just to address, can you contract for things? There's specific language in the emergency powers that, once that emergency order is given and those go into effect, again, the way that they were drafted originally is due to catastrophic damage and things like that. So adjusting that to how you're dealing with the contagion, the COVID, that's a little bit different, and common sense is going to have to be thrown in there. For instance, with regards to the damage, the hurricanes, you're allowed to go out and contract so that you can make the, your condominium property so that it's tenable, so that you can access it, so that it's safe. You can get engineers out there. You're allowed to go do all these things that you're doing on an emergency basis to make it safe for everybody. You're also allowed to mitigate any further damage. So you can enter into contracts with service providers in order to, if you've got to trim trees, if you have trees that are falling, to have them removed. You can go out there and do all those things. And as long as it's a legitimate emergency or something that's protecting the association and the association property, you can do that. The other thing you can do is, let's say, as Florida, the way that we're set up, there's a lot of snowbirds. And there are people who just aren't here during the summer when the hurricane season is here, and their units are unoccupied. So if there's an issue with their unit, when these emergency powers are in play, you're allowed to go ahead and you can assess their units and their situation. For instance, if there's a water leak or something from a roof leaking and it's gotten into one of the units, and it could possibly affect the unit downstairs, but let's say that's the unit member's responsibility. You can contract on their behalf to get that done, and then go back to them and say, hey, look, we were working under the Emergency Powers Act. This is what we did. It's actually your responsibility. And they're actually going to be liable to pay the association back under these emergency powers. So you can do those things. And what I say is, you've got to use, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but these new emergency powers, that plus other legislation protects the association from making decisions to protect the community and the people, as long as you're following what the local health officials are telling you. But in this instance, if there's some sort of damage to a property, or you need to do something to unit members, if you're using a good business judgment, you're going to be okay. as long as you're not doing something crazy or you're just trying to improve and something that you want and using that emergency as a, kind of a false flag to get something done, you're going to be fine. But you really got to look at it, but you really want to protect the association and mitigate further damage, because if you allow further damage to happen, that's when the negligence comes in. I don't think anybody's going to be upset with the board if they're utilizing these emergency powers to protect the association. That's really what they're there for. That's the whole intent. Again, it will be a little bit more difficult to apply it to a contagion, but just keep that in mind, because hurricane season is here and there is going to be damage. And I mean, we just already have one storm out there on the East Coast and one over by Mexico. So it's supposed to be a busy season. So then I got one more question. Can the CDC, NIH, or president override DeSantis' executive order? That is a depends kind of question. Basically, the president does have the power to execute an executive order. The CDC, there are things that can be challenged. There are things that they can do. They can limit travel, things like that. But when you're dealing with the local associations like us, I mean, you guys are governed by Florida law, generally not federal law, except for, where you're dealing with housing and things like that. You guys are creatures of statute. So Florida statute controls. The federal government doesn't control the way that our laws work on that level. But the president does have certain powers where he can implement laws that we would have to follow. And at some point, depending on the constitutionality of it, comes into play on whether the governor can override that. One example of that is, which drives me crazy because I deal a lot with evictions, is the CDC order that you can't evict people that aren't paying rent. I mean, I have homeowners and that have not received rent we're going on over a year, and the CDC wants to run that through the end of I want to say the end of June. Are they going to extend that? I don't know, but there's been 5 federal courts that have basically said, well, that's unconstitutional, but the 11th Circuit, which controls Florida, has not, because it hasn't gone up that far. But I think the 5th Circuit, 4th Circuit, and 2nd Circuit have all said it's unconstitutional and they've overstepped their bounds. Meanwhile, they're still not suspending it because they're going to let it go to the Supreme Court, I'm assuming. But things like that where they do overstep their bounds. I know here, Governor DeSantis, he had orders allowing people to stay there. So they kind of mirror each other. But generally speaking, Florida law is going to control how you guys operate your association. And nothing coming from the federal government is going to override that unless it's a statutory law, the federal government. The one we're talking about now, the legislature did, and this is why I think it's going to remain through June 30th, the legislature included it as part of the aid package. They went ahead and said, hey, you can't evict anybody through June 30th when it sunsets. So we'll see if that gets extended and how it's addressed. I personally think that the courts that said it's unconstitutional are correct, because people don't buy property so somebody else can live in it rent free. It's a very difficult situation. Let's see. I got one more question. What if you don't take an action that's permitted under the statute? For example, if a ground floor unit has a flood during a hurricane, but which wouldn't negatively affect the association as a whole, and the board doesn't act to protect that unit, is there any liability on the board for not acting? That's a good question. Basically, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. What I would say is that you have to act with good business judgment. If something is happening that puts association property in danger, then you have a duty to act. But just because there's a bottom floor that's being damaged, but it's not affecting anything else, I don't know that you would necessarily have to act to protect that unit. What the emergency powers do, they give you the power to act, but they don't require you to act in any way, okay? It just gives you powers that you need in order to get things done. Now, if you know of some damage that's happening and it could affect association property, that's a different story. But if you're protecting the contents of somebody's property, I think there's a delineation there. I think one, you're not required to act, but you are required to act to protect in the best interest of the association. So that's how I would answer that one. Okay.
Derrick, I can add to that. It really depends too, I think, on the physical layout of the building. I had a circumstance where a building had like a common area that would flood first and then it would flow, towards the units. And so in that circumstance, we always made sure we did everything we could to stop the flood in the common area before it ever got to the unit. So I think the layout of the community has a lot to do with that as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think my first thought process would be, is this going to affect, the association property? And if it is, I definitely think there's a duty to act. Looking at the individual units, there's more that goes into that question because, I know a lot of people that go up north, they hire companies to check in on their property and do things like that. And I know there's a lot of associations that the individual managers contract with people to watch their places. So under that situation, yeah, there's probably a duty to act to protect that individual unit. So there's other factors that have to be looked at. So, but the big thing I would definitely agree with Fiona. How is the association affected as a whole? So, okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. Sorry, 12. So now that the 2021 hurricane season just started on June 1st, we're going to talk about the emergency powers and how they apply to storm damage. Panelists, do you want to walk us through the condominium statutes and any recommendations to board members in the event of a hurricane? Jeff, I think you're on mute. You got your mute on. There you go.
Yeah, I'm having trouble unmuting. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this first subsection is enter into agreements with local counties and municipalities to assist counties and municipalities with debris removal. We're fortunate. We live in a community where both the local government and the county government take hurricane preparation very seriously. They've invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of staff into putting together disaster plans and hurricane readiness plans. So we're fortunate we can cooperate with emergency officials, with the planning departments. We can coordinate with them and absolutely should. I guess my comment here would be there's a difference between cooperating, coordinating, relying upon for guidance, and then counting on for things like debris removal. I've lived here since 1987. I moved to Sarasota, and I can remember in the aftermath of the especially busy hurricane season of 2004, some of the other hurricane seasons that have come, we've been really fortunate in that most of the damage that we've sustained in this area has been landscaping damage, right? Creates a lot of debris. But I can remember back to every one of those. In each of those situations, the city and the county had already contracted with outside vendors to come in and handle debris removal. But because so often the hurricanes will kind of work their way right up the coast, we found ourselves competing from a labor standpoint with Collier County or Lee County. And those vendors were going to wherever the highest, to whoever the highest bidder was. And so in the aftermath of some of the hurricanes that we had that came near us and did some landscaping damage, the issue of debris removal, I mean, it just didn't really, it didn't move along fast enough for most of our communities. And I can tell some horror stories from trying to deal with debris removal. But I think the point is, all of the panelists that are talking today, I mean, we're all part of companies that have contracts with national vendors who will come in and do disaster type remediation work. And I think that's a good idea. Hope for the best with your local and county officials, but to rely on them completely and to expect that their timeline is going to be the same as yours, I would want to have a plan B.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, so those are some great points, Jeff. I'm going to use that as a jumping off point. So important that boards implement a disaster plan that addresses pre-storm, during storm, and post-storm. And just as what Jeff said, you can partner with these emergency restoration companies that will come in and do a complete free assessment to document your community beforehand, give you a disaster plan, and then when post-storm, you're already considered a preferred client, and they'll put you on the list to come out and get you back to safe again. You know, the particulars you have to work out, but definitely a great idea to do that. And your plan should take into effect a scenario where you may be recovering from a storm under emergency powers, or maybe not. Maybe you just had a ton of wind damage, but they didn't put your county in emergency powers. So your plan could take a couple different avenues. Assuming you're under an emergency order, you'll have different resources and more resources that you can use as an association. So just have the different avenues that you can take in your mind and in your plan. Boards, make sure that you publish this plan and give it out to all of your owners. They may have a role they have to play, whether that's just clearing off their patio or their, you know, their front porches or whatever it may be. Make sure everybody knows what they're to do prior to a storm. And then this really for seasonal properties that have owners that go home half the year, they're gone during hurricane season. So make sure that they didn't leave 16 potted plants out, you know. So those are things that need to be addressed in your plan. And again, communication, so everybody knows. When there's a hurricane coming, we tend to think internally about ourselves, our family, our own property. But as board members, you have to wear that business hat, like Fiona mentioned. You've got to put that business hat on and take account the association, how you're going to help protect that. So make sure your plan addresses shelters, where your owners have to go, how to prepare the buildings, your pool area, your amenities. What paperwork do you need? Assuming that the power could be out for a couple of days. Make sure you have a copy of your insurance agent's phone number and of course your manager's cell phone number and a copy of your policy with you in place. Even if it's on your email, you may not have access to get to that. And then let's talk about post-storm. How do we mitigate further damage? So again, assuming that you've made some sort of agreement with a emergency restoration company, you may have that in place where they're going to come out after, assess the damage, and make a plan to get you back to safe. But what do you need to do? Removal of debris, that's going to be huge. You want to make sure your egress and ingress is all clear. Do your roof tarps, if you have issues with roofs, windows, to mold and mildew is going to become a huge issue in a storm. So you're going to have the option to go in and remove and dispose of wet fixtures, cabinets, insulation, drywall that could spread throughout the building in other areas that maybe weren't affected. So just keep an eye on those emergency powers, know what you can do, have that disaster plan in place, published, everybody knows what to do, it's on the same page. The earlier you do it in hurricane season, the less you have to worry about when you're running from a storm in 2 days and you have 2 days to get out of your home and figure out where to go. If that's already in place, you have nothing to do but make the essential calls. So again, rely on your manager, your insurance agent, your emergency disaster restoration people, and I think you'll be in a much better spot than you will if you're trying to do something last minute.
Great point, Alex. The next slide really talks about evacuation. So before the storm and as the storm approaches, some things to keep in mind in terms of what you are able to do under your powers when an emergency powers are in use. So you can require that the condominium mandatorily evacuate, right? Now, under the guidance of the emergency order, you can say everyone's got to get out. So a question I would be asking is, how are you going to communicate with your owners? Are you going to be able to text them? Are you going to be able to robocall them? Are you going to be able to put up signage in the common areas? You got to think about multiple modes of communication so that can get out that there is going to be an evacuation. So one thing to think about there. Now, you're going to have people who don't want to evacuate. So this is an important piece that shields you from liability as the board, so that you're immune from liability to people who decide to stay and get hurt on property. We just to kind of give you another story, we've got a board who literally requires that if anyone's going to stay, they have to sign something that says, as your board of directors asked you to leave, there's a mandatory evacuation and you're deciding to stay, and it's shielding you from the board and the association from any liability, just to go a step further. So just something to think about there, because you're going to have people who want to stay. The next piece is when the storm blows over. And this is, what is your plan? And the board has the authority to have people on retainer, like emergency service providers, engineers, that will say it's safe to go back into the community. So it is your right to have somebody retained that says, okay, now you can safely go back into the property. So again, just like on the communication piece that we talked about, multiple modes to reach out to your residents to let them know that they've got to get out. You got to have multiple modes to let them know that it's okay to get back in. And how are you going to let them know that it's safe to be back in? So that's everything from checking the electricity to checking all of the major components of the building that allow it to be safe, especially since this is Downtown Sarasota Condo Association. This is more applicable to downtown condos. So have people on retainer that are going to allow you to safely inhabit your building. So those are my takeaways from there.
Thanks, Jake. And then I can add too, so now that everyone's talked about all the different phases here of the plan, and storm has gone through, and now we're assessing the damage like Jake talked about. Then the question is, okay, great. No one was hurt. Everybody evacuated because it's a perfect world. The bad news is the building is got no windows. There's water frickin' everywhere. There's sand everywhere. It's a hot mess. And how are we going to pay for it, guys? So the key here is we don't want to have this conversation after we've all had 72 hours of heavy, heavy stress, right? You want to have this conversation just like you're having the conversation way ahead of time about where you're going to do your, staging areas and when the staff is going to leave. Don't leave the financial conversation to the end. Sit down with your management company, your CPA, your treasurer, your finance committee. Let's look at your finances and let's talk about worst case scenario. What if that happens? And your insurance agent needs to be in on that in conversation. And you want to have that conversation every year as part of your hurricane plan, because things change, insurance changes, your financial situation changes. So let's have that conversation. And then luckily, if worst case scenario does happen under the emergency powers, regardless of what your documents say, you do have the ability to levy a special assessment, to go out and get a loan. And again, don't go alone, as we like to say. Make sure that we've got a written plan, that we know what we're going to do in scenario A, B, and C, and involve your association attorney in those conversations ahead of hurricane season. And then, gosh forbid, if you do get hit, make sure you got the attorney on the phone and you're saying, here's our plan. We're following the plan we had, and here's what we're planning on doing. And Derrick, give us some guidance. So that would be my best advice. Do not wait, because it's a high stress situation. And we all know we shouldn't be making big decisions when we're under a lot of stress. So if you can get it organized ahead of time, talk about those worst case scenarios when everybody's calm, it'll go a long, long way. And you'll feel better when the storm is coming, because you have a solid plan.
Hey,
Thanks,
Derrick.
Fiona.
I wanted to ask just a quick question, because this is something, and it might be a hot button issue, but one of the things that we always get is, well, the staff's going to stay, right? So there's a hurricane coming, and I'm seeing Alex and Fiona and Jeff maybe shaking their head. Oh, well, the staff's going to stay and they're going to take care of the building. And it's like, we have these conversations every year where it's like, if it is a mandatory evacuation, literally everyone is leaving because it's a mandatory evacuation, including employees. And we've done agreements to where someone decides, who's a staff member of the building decides to stay on their own accord. And there's an agreement between the association and someone who's not, a FirstService residential employee. But do you guys get that a lot? Fiona, Jeff, Alex, the staff's going to stay, or?
We have, Jake. So, in some of our buildings, we've had, a lot of the times the frontline staff say, this building is more secure than my home because wherever they live, right? So they truly feel it's a safer place. And in those scenarios, gosh, you feel for people, right? If an area where everyone's saying get out and leave, and they're saying this is safer than where I, should go. So we always, try to help. But yes, we always get the association's attorney involved if that's the scenario, and full conversation with the board and in writing, so that can all be discussed. I don't know if Derrick, if you have thoughts on that, but.
I mean, it's a personal question for somebody to stay behind. I would say if you have a mandatory evacuation order, I don't recommend having any sort of an agreement with a staff member to stay behind, because if something happens to that staff member, then you're talking about liability in two ways. One, you're asking them to do something, obviously, if you're not staying, that you're not willing to do, and they're violating an order. Now, a mandatory evacuation, there's no criminal thing, anything tied to that if you ignore it. If somebody chooses to stay of their own accord, that's great. That's one thing. But as an association, I would never recommend that they have somebody stay behind in an area that has a mandatory evacuation, because you're asking them to take on responsibility. And remember, you have a fiduciary duty to the health, safety, and welfare of those members, but also to your employees, right? So asking somebody to stay behind, I would say that's not a good judgment call. And I would not recommend doing that. And you see it all the time on the news. There's always somebody that stays behind, and they gets filled up, and you see the sirens. And I think the last one that came through, they basically said, look, we're done. They shut off Longbow Key, and they said, we're not coming back. If you get stuck out here, the water comes up, we're not coming for you. You're on your own. And if you were to put somebody in that position and something happened to them and they died, that family's going to go after somebody probably because, well, they didn't want to stay. You made them stay, And now I say that I spent a long time in the National Guard. I love going into hurricane areas. I like watching it. I like seeing it. And there are other people that like that, but don't ever put that on them and put them in that position.
Are you volunteering for your clients, Derrick?
Yeah. What I would tell you is,
we'll put you on staff, Derrick.
Yeah, right? Now we know
who's calling for you, Derrick.
Every one of my clients gets my personal cell phone number, and I'm happy to come out. Believe me.
I love this topic, both Jake, what you said about asking the staff to stay behind. This happened to us during COVID, the shutdown. The boards expected the managers still to come to work in the office by themselves. So we could go off and do a whole seminar on reasonable expectations of managers, but I put this back on the managers as well, because sometimes we feel like we're so invested in the properties we manage, we feel like maybe we should be that designated survivor of the properties. But we've been doing some talks just recently on project management. Boards need to know what their manager's skill set are and where it starts and stops with them. And CAMs need to know or managers need to know not to take on too much in the name of service and the best CAM ever.
Yeah, I think some of it stems from a misunderstanding of what it means to live in a condominium association. That residents have. And I think it's on us that we sometimes, because we are familiar with what condominium life is like, and most of our board members are familiar with what the boundaries of condominium life are. But that doesn't mean that everybody who moves into a condominium understands that, hey, when the hurricane hits and everybody's ordered to evacuate and the staff evacuate, no, the staff is not going to be hanging hurricane panels outside your unit. They're not there. That's not what they do. But I think that it's sometimes just an education process, and it goes back to the discussion earlier that I think Alex was raising about the planning. And the planning should not just be with the leadership of the association, not just be the board, but with the residents as well, that, okay, guys, in the event of a hurricane, here's what you can expect from staff in terms of securing the common areas, in terms of removing the pool furniture and those types of things. But here are the things that they're not going to be able to do for you. So let's plan ahead for how those things are going to be taken care of. Because I don't think it's not a malicious intent of, hey, I expect the staff to stay here and do all of these things. It's more, well, I just didn't know that that's where their boundaries were. So again, have those discussions before the hurricane hits.
Thanks, Jeff. The one thing I want to go back to was the question about liability. That when you're taking action and you're looking at these emergency powers, just remember that you do have a fiduciary duty to everybody, and that fiduciary duty is to take care of them. But what the statute specifically says is when this goes into effect, the condominium may but is not required to take the actions that are laid out in these emergency powers. Okay, so it's there to help you. It's there to assist you. The one thing that you can do, and I just got a question that I'm responding to, is do statutes address the use of reserve funds in an emergency? My answer to that is no, not really. And I just put that in the group chat, and I apologize for the typo, but it's not addressed in the Emergency Powers Act. You can go to your reserves, but you're going to go through the voting process if you're going to use it for something other than that. But what you can do under these emergency powers is you can levy special assessments, and you can do it without the vote of the owners to get things done that way. So, if you're going to go to your reserves that you have to use them for something other than what they're designated for, there's a process that you're going to have to go to. And, we could talk about that all day, but as far as using those for emergency purposes, you can't do that without going back to the owners and getting their permission. But special assessments is one way. If it's an emergency and something, if you have a roof that was ripped off or something like that, that's what I think you're looking to utilize it for. So you can go ahead and protect that and get things going, because I don't know, Sarasota's never been hit that bad, in my opinion. I've been in places where it is so bad, you can't get contractors in there, you can't get anybody in there to do anything. And you're bringing people from out of state, because there's, if Darren was here from Right Way, he would tell you he probably loves hurricanes, because they are just so busy that he has to turn business away because he can't get to everybody. Tree removal, you'd be surprised. You go on Craigslist after a hurricane, all of a sudden you've got so many tree removal people that but are they legitimate? Are they good? Who knows? So you got to make sure you're doing your homework and doing this stuff. But that's how you would get to it. That's why you were able to go ahead and take those actions to contract with those people without having to go through the normal process. That's why you do that, to get it back to a state where you can have your meeting, conduct your operations, get people in there safely. That's what it's all there for. So just remember that. Okay. Anybody have anything to add on that? Okay. What I would say, always, when in doubt, board or manager should discuss any planned actions with the association attorney. They're the great people, association attorneys. Everybody loves them. So let me see what we got next. Oh, wait. Recently, Senate Bill 2006 was signed by Governor DeSantis. Basically what this did, this was on 5/31, it was executed. It authorized the Legislative Budget Commission to convene to transfer certain emergency management plan and provide for certain public health emergency communications, and include the Department of Health's Public Health Emergency Plan. It redefined the term essentials. Now that includes personal protective equipment, used during public health emergencies, specifying requirements for the purpose and scope of emergency orders. He was able to take money and put it into a certain fund that can be used I remember when this all happened, there were no masks, there was no PPE anywhere, you couldn't get it. I have some clients now that they're dealing with, they provided N95 masks to people, and there's counterfeit masks. There was so much going on. It was so crazy because nobody had these stockpiles that they had, and they're trying to, to help with that stuff, giving the legislature a leg up to be prepared for the next one. Hopefully there won't be another one, but you never know. And I think that, the legislature is taking the right steps. I think everybody throughout the country is doing this now. Even the federal government is stocking up so that we don't run into that stuff again. And I think they're reacting correctly to this stuff. It's difficult. I think the main idea to take away from this is stay updated on the emergency orders. I remember when this went down, the emergency orders were coming out every other week. They would implement one and they would change it. They would implement another. And it was difficult to stay up with. CDC guidelines or any other emergency regulations that pertain to the health, safety, and welfare of your residents. Check on your residents, see how they're doing. Speak with your association attorney about creating policies, rules, and enforcement procedures. I'm happy to discuss that with anybody and see what you can and can't do. And, the main focus when you're dealing with this stuff is what's happening in our community. You can't base what you're doing on what's happening in the other parts of the state. It's very, very difficult. That's not only for the contagion stuff, but with the hurricanes, because I remember when Hurricane Charlie came through, it came up the middle of the state, nailed everything. I was in the National Guard at the time, and we went to DeSoto County, was totally destroyed, but they were taking care of themselves. So we went down to Miami where it cut across. It cut across Miami, then came back up the other side of the state. Well, we were in Miami for 3 days because they were fine. And we ended up going back up to the Panhandle, which got hit by the very next hurricane. So within 72 hours, we went from Miami over to here, and it was night and day. What was happening in Miami, they had issued some emergency orders, but they immediately retracted them because it wasn't so bad. Whereas in the Panhandle, I saw houses, a complete row of houses just gone. They were no longer there. Cars were covered in mud, and it was insane. And they had the orders they were issuing were completely different from what was going on in the rest of the state. So you want to check your local stuff. Take reasonable measures to enforce your rules and regulations, and observe limitations on emergency powers. Just make sure you're looking at it, familiarize yourself with it. There's not that much there, but it does give you the ability to go forward and react and do the things you need to do to protect your community. So, I would just ask the panel, do you guys have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I just want to say thanks, Derrick, so much for moderating this, and thanks to all the panelists. But I just want to thank all the board members who are committed to their associations and joining us on these seminars. So I commend you for volunteering. I know it's been a hard year. We hear you. Some of you volunteered. Others of you went to a meeting as a homeowner and came out a president. So I know it's been a tough time. I urge you to lean on your resources, whether that be your manager, your legal counsel, your insurance agent. These people can all help guide you through anything going on with the pandemic or upcoming hurricanes. So use your resources. Don't feel like you have to shoulder everything on your own. And Fiona said this earlier, and it's so important. Remember that you're running a business. Make business decisions, not personal decisions. And you're already halfway there by attending these type of seminars. You're doing the best you can to make the best decision. So I commend you all for that. And thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, and I'll just add, very well said, Alex. And I would just say, thank you for having Castle today. I enjoyed being here. I always learn something, guys, when I come on these. That's why I love doing them. And I applaud everybody for being here. And plan, and then communicate. And if you do just those two things, you'll be ahead of a lot of associations. So thanks for having us today.
Yeah, I echo both those thoughts. I have a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for people who volunteer to serve on their boards. I'll admit I question your sanity at times for choosing to do this, but seriously have tremendous amount of respect for you doing that. And when we talk about things like this, the emergency powers and COVID-19 and hurricane season and all of those types of things, it just reinforces what you're doing matters. What you're doing is important to your community, and we appreciate what you do.
Well, my fellow panelists said everything. Great job. The only thing I would add was just don't reinvent the wheel, right? If you're trying to figure something out, it's been done before. There is a standard in the industry, and reach out. If we can ever be of assistance, let us know. Thanks for having us. Great panel.
Any other words from any of our other panelists before I introduce our Platinum Associate members? Nope. Okay, again, a big thank you to Derrick for moderating, and to all of our panelists for the excellent information. I do want to take an opportunity to introduce some of our Platinum Associate members who are on the call. What we're going to do is analyze the list of attendees that have opted in for accepting a prize, and we'll be contacting the winners of the giveaway at a later date. So if we could have, I know what I'm going to do is read off the ones I know that are here, and if at the end, if I missed anybody, please speak up. So we have Alex from Associa Gulf Coast. Anything you'd like to add, Alex?
Yeah, so again, thanks to everybody for the DSEA for hosting. Jamie, thank you for your part in this. Again, Associa Gulf Coast, we manage associations, HOA, condominium, resort style communities, high rise, low rise, mid rise. So we manage just about anything from Polk County down to Marco Island. So certainly anyone in this call, we're happy to speak with you about management services. And I just want to throw out there, we do a monthly board member success series. And in June 29th, we're hosting a webinar with Matt Mercier from CBiz Insurance, and he's going to be doing a whole insurance market update, as well as the new laws that were just signed in, or the new bills that were signed in. So it's going to be an awesome seminar. I'm going to send a flyer to the DSEA. Please join up, and it's going to be great info. So thanks so much.
Next up, we have Castle Group, and that could be either Fiona. I don't know if Shauna was on.
Thanks, Jamie. I think I probably said enough, but I would invite everybody who's on the call to go to castlegroup.com/webinars. We love to do education, and we have a probably a gazillion different webinars that are have been given over the past year or so at castlegroup.com/webinars, and then you can get more information from us there. Thanks again for having me today.
And next up from Core Marketing, we have Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Jamie, Patrick, all the DSCA board members. Thanks for allowing us to have this presentation today. Derrick, great job. And panelists, I mean, I just think the presentation was excellent. Your information was so good. So I really appreciate all your input there. Really, you guys know me. The three people that I represent, CBiz, Professional Plumbing, and Forge Engineering, they kind of work hand in hand, getting you ready for storm season should there be an emergency. CBiz can prepare you, make sure your risk analysis is intact. So if you do have to file a claim, you're ready for that. Right Way Emergency Services can clean you up. They can also do a drone and a Matterport 3D analysis of your interior and your exterior assets. And Forge Engineering, of course, is your building envelope inspection specialist. They can make sure that you're up to building code, so that if you do have to file a claim, you'll get that paid out. And then I also represent Professional Plumbing. Something very interesting that Matt was telling me about, your clogged roof drain stacks. If those can really lead to roof failure and flooding, and you really need to get those cleaned out and inspected. You can get a video inspection of that, so that if a storm hits, you want to make sure your drains are working properly. You don't want anything additionally damaging to your building in that regard. So again, thank you, Jamie from the DSCA. Those are my platinum members. And thank you again, panelists. Great job.
I'm going to jump around a little bit, then I'll come back to the other two in alphabetical order. Was Michelle here from Tannenbaum Scroll? I thought I saw her.
I'm here. I don't think my video's on, but I'm here.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
I couldn't get it to come on. But anyway, I just want to say great job to all of the panelists and moderator. Derrick, you did a great job. Very interesting panel. And I'm with Tannenbaum Scroll Law Firm, and we specialize in construction work. So anything from repair maintenance to turnover to defects And, it's important to understand that you may think that everything is fine, but it's always good to look under the table, so to speak. And that's what we do the best. We also have a Zoom panel that happens every month. Our next one will be July 6th, and it's called the Smart Board and Property Manager Legal Guide. And we'll be covering aging condominiums, whether or not to repair or abandon them. So if you're interested, please give me a reach out by email, and I'll be very happy to send you the Zoom link. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. And we're coming back to FirstService with Jake.
Hello, Jake Howse with FirstService Residential. We've been in the area for 30 years, managed properties all over North America. We have a presence in downtown Sarasota. We're so proud of the buildings that we manage. And thank you to all the panelists who are here and everyone. One thing that I would just mention is that, and this is a plug for Rightway, but that 3D camera zoom thing that they have, plus well, they'll come in and look at the contents of your entire building and exterior. That is just an incredible thing that I don't see other emergency providers do. So if I was on a board, I would definitely be calling them to get a picture of everything in the community. But anyways, so if we can ever help, let us know. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake. And finally, we have Jeff with Lighthouse.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being a part of this panel. It was a lot of fun, and I agree, it was very educational. So thank you for that. Again, we've been around for 30 years in this market. Happy to help you out in any way that we can. Invite you to visit our website at lighthousepropertymanagement.net to find out more information about us, and look forward to talking to many of you soon.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any other Platinum members, Platinum Associate members that are on the call that I have missed? If so, speak up now. Nope. Okay. Well, thanks again, Derrick, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thanks, Jamie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.